streaming remotely. There will be a very brief pause, and then your chair will then introduce us with welcome introductions and move us formally into today's business. Obviously, just before we go live, usual practicalities and reminders. You're all socially distanced. If you are speaking, please ensure you use your microphones, just because the acoustics of the chamber, as ever, can be quite disruptive. Again, when you're moving about the chamber, wear your masks. There's no fire alarm drills scheduled. Therefore, for any
to welcome everyone to the Finance and Resources Select Committee, including hopefully those people that are watching online from the public as well. So just for them to note, we have councillors here cross-party who are members of the committee itself. There's a couple of other councillors that have attended. There's the cabinet member for Finance and Resources who's here for scrutiny purposes today, and officers that support the cabinet member. So, and thank you all for coming. The first item just on the agenda is if there's any declarations of interest on any of the first item just on the agenda is if there's any declarations of interest on any of the
crucial for us, not only coming up to the budget, but also looking at the way that they're being used at the moment, whether there's any duplication, because we need to drive that out, what the impact is on the ground, because they can be very, very useful, and also how they can actually increase the impact. By having that money going in, they can then encourage other money to come in as well. They're very flexible, as we know. So we've got the Mayoral Neighbourhood Fund, we've got the Hardship Fund, we've got the Youth Consortium Fund, but then the Community Resources grants are ones that go across the city that people apply for, and the same with some of the ones around youth provision. So all of those, what we're trying to do is we've trialled this in the Everton ward already, where we were using our youth consortium funding to make sure that any of the groups that were receiving that had an experienced, qualified youth worker or somebody in that position that was there, and that they would use their best endeavours to be paying real living wage. And as you heard before in the presentation previously about living hours as well. So in there, that's what we're doing. Now, there will be a full review of all of those streams of funding coming to the next committee, which is at the end of September, Chair. So you'll be able to see that. That'll be quite a big report. And the idea is that we bring it to you for pre-scrutiny as well. So you'll see all the information, you'll see all the streams coming through, going back over the years as well, which will give you a pattern of what's happening. So there'll be analysis against that. And then we can work in terms of listening to what you're saying about the way forward. We can listen to that as a cabinet and see how we want to take this forward. The same will be happening on the next point down here, review of the community asset transfers that have gone down the years, historic use, known impact and way forward, going back to 15. But if we can go back to 2010 as well, depending on what paperwork we have there and the report on the recording of that would be really helpful. And that will come for pre-scrutiny. So you'll get two things there. You'll get the council streams of funding and you'll get the community assets, and where we can learn lessons from the use of those, where things haven't been put in place, where there's no conditions, the impact of that, where there have been conditions, the impact of that. And so we can work our way forward so we can maximise, for the benefit of the city and the communities that we represent, the use of council assets and council discretionary grants. The easiest thing for councils to do is cut out anything that's discretionary when it comes to difficult budget decisions. But what we want to do is look at this in the piece and in the round and see how we can be really flexible with the money that we've got, regardless of whether it's discretionary or not, and look at the impact on the ground, because sometimes it's pure false economy to cut some of the discretionary, because all that happens is it puts pressure on further downstream. In terms of the council assets, to be honest with you, I've been really shocked at what I found as being over property asset management, in terms of the gaps in information in leases, in conditions, it's not across the council, but in some. And so we can reflect that in that, so we can use our assets really well. Monitoring the impact of one-stop shops. Councillor Shortall mentioned that before. So that will be over the next, we'll have a full report after the 3 months, but it'll be brought up at every meeting. The impact and use of the Marmot framework, it can't be overly, well, it's so important. So I had a meeting with Matt Ashton yesterday, and it's looking at those 6 principles, and also seeing the local authority as a key driver in taking those forward. So as you know, we're now a member of the Cheshire and Merseyside Marmot community. We are putting together our response to the Marmot principles, and one of those obviously is fair employment and good work. The one that the government haven't signed up to and still haven't signed up to is ensuring a healthy standard of living for all, which is outrageous because they should have done. Then you're looking at inclusive budget setting process, and making sure that as many people as possible can have a say in the budget and understand it. You've got to understand it first. So you've got the 3 questions going out across the city, which will run parallel to when the budget consultation will come in. So trying to keep people not only thinking about the council money, but also seeing our council money and our city response in terms of the city plan. I've had a good meeting with the Joint Trades Union Council. So looking at JTUC proactively and seeing how they can, how the unions can come to the table with ideas. So they're being proactive rather than just reactive, because they're a key relationship and partner in there. Delegated authorities reports, those come to me every single week when I have my cabinet member reporting and briefing session. So then you get the audit trail coming through very, very clearly, where it was discussed.
On any of the items
to do as a council regarding cutting £32.8 million. How are we going to ever reach the Marmite principles?
I'll have to try and be quick on this, Chair.
Okay.
Whether I can or not is another matter.
We'll come back to probably the most substantive when we talk about the budget, but
Okay. So the key thing about the Marmot principles, Michael Marmot's laid that out really carefully. Manchester, he did a heavy duty piece of work in Manchester and in York as well. And this is why it comes to the Health and Wellbeing Board, because the health inequality here is increasing dramatically, as we know. So the answer to that is there is a balance here between national government getting their act together, to be perfectly honest with you, and saying we signed up to the Marmot principles. It was cross-party agreed in January, whenever it was, January 2010. Every single one was signed up cross-party. But then what happened was this particular government said, no, we're not going to sign up to a healthy standard of living for all. Why not? So there has to be two things going on here. There has to be a pushback to government where they need to come in. There has to be a pushback to businesses to say, don't mess people about. Don't expect productivity to rise when you're paying them an absolute pittance. And there are no living hours there, let alone real living wage. And then it's our responsibility as well to use the little resources that we have to see how we can do this. So the biggest principle that we have here, which I'm hanging on to, and I know you are as well, which is the proportionate universalism. Of course, there has to be a service for everybody across this city. Where it's needed most, that's where the resources get stacked up. And that's very difficult for people who don't live in the most disadvantaged areas.
Councillor Shortall.
Yeah, thanks. My question's not on the agenda here, but it follows through because I was assured it was part of this select committee's work, and it's on Section 106 grants. We had that displayed in the Neighbourhoods Committee, but they assured me this committee is actually in charge of that Section 106 grants. And what I was about to ask for was a presentation on it, because there's a lot of confusion over it. There's a big pot of money there, what it could be spent of. And I was asking the cabinet member if that could be possible, and also who sits on the committee and what officers sit on the committee. Because I asked yesterday, by the way, and they said definitely it sits with this committee and it's there was Jane's responsibility.
I'm aware, Chair, that Chris will come in now, but I'm aware that Councillor Sarah Doyle is looking at this in detail in her committee. Obviously, money. I oversee money. However, Chris, do you want to? Because you know the structure of how that works. Sorry, Chair.
Because there's three different elements to it. One's the executive process for 106 spend, and that's a subcommittee underneath the cabinet, and that's been for a couple of years. That produces reports that go to the cabinet, and members can call those in. The Neighbourhood Committee looks at the allocation in terms of how that spend operates in communities. The governance of the Section 106 is with Audit Committee, and that was discussed at the Chair's session at the last meeting. So there'll be a report around the governance around Section 106 and how it's spent at audit. So it's not this committee. There's a Cabinet Committee, Neighbourhood Committee deal with the spend in the communities, i.e. what the 106 is used for, and the governance of 106 as a framework as audit.
We could ask Chris to write that up and give it to you, Chair, for a note going round.
I mean, what I was going to suggest was that, so obviously one of the key things that you've asked is how much is available for spending and where, because obviously it's locality linked to particular wards, and how much has been spent as one issue. Is that right? Have I got that right? Because so what I was going to say was if I can have a chat with the chair of the relevant committee and make sure that question can go there, and I'll tell you, then you can either attend that meeting or get a response to that through them. Is that all right? And then in terms of the governance, Councillor Corbett, can we just get a response to that, to the committee anyway? I know not looking at the governance, but just who sits on the subcommittee, and then we can feed that back anyway.
Chair, by way of assistance, the membership of the subcommittee is chaired by Councillor Sarah Doyle, and the remaining two members on it were drawn from Cabinet, Councillors Daniel Barrington and Councillors Abdul Kadir, which reflects their roles in terms of their portfolio responsibilities, which overlap in terms of the usage of funds across communities. So it therefore is commensurate for them to assess and allocate the funding proposals as they come forward.
Thanks, Mike. Is that okay? So Chris, if we go, so it's the Neighbourhoods Committee that deals with the spend.
Chair, we'll do a note on this so members are quite clear. There's quite a lot of paperwork going to go through that subcommittee underneath the Cabinet, quite a comprehensive report which might assist members. But we'll do a note on the framework so everyone's quite clear what's going where and for what reason.
Councillor Crowe.
Mike, I understand some proposals are already kind of on the table, fairly much ready to go. So is there going to be a subcommittee meeting fairly soon to start working through the backlog of projects that are already designed?
Thank you, Councillor Crowe. And it's my understanding that the subcommittee will meet early next week with a view to a recommendation being submitted to Cabinet on the 27th of August, which will mean the papers for that meeting will go live towards the middle of next week.
Okay. Yeah, Councillor Harvey and then Councillor Connor.
Sorry, I just had a question about the inclusive budget setting process. I just wanted to know, like, how are we going to ensure that, like, we make that as inclusive as possible, and like how we're going to know if that's how we are measuring success of the process. How we make sure it's not just about councillors, how we include our communities in this process, and what like measures we're going to put in place to make sure it's a success. Thanks.
Yeah, so we're trying to do several things. One is we've got this questionnaire, three big questions going out across the city, which will be able to be online as well, and you can do them in groups rather than just individuals. And the 3 open questions which relate into the city plan as well, rather than just the council, and they are what do you love about our city, and the second one is what would you love to see in our city, and the third one is what would make our city stronger and fairer. Now they're deliberately open questions which feed into the city plan, because it's not just us in the city. The city plan is about all our partners, all our businesses, all our anchor institutions, all our micro businesses, etc., the schools, the whole lot. And we will look at the analysis of that. As the answers come in, they'll be checked weekly, and then they'll be fed into the Cabinet, but also into my Cabinet member briefing. That will give us a bit of a reflection on what is in people's hearts and minds at the moment in the city. And I'm waiting for a lot of negative stuff to come through, because it's a very, very difficult time. And as we know, we've had 10 years plus of austerity, which Councillor Byrne said before kills people, and it does. Then we've also we're going to do the budget consultation itself. But what I'm wanting us to do is to keep at the connected higher level for the city before we start diving straight down into reactions on budget options. In that, it is absolutely crucial that people have the right information. So the infographic should be there, really clear, not only what we've got in terms of money, but also where it comes from, and what the pressures have been over the last couple of years, particularly with the pandemic. So the assumptions are crucial, and we can't get away from the fact that the pandemic has caused us real difficulties in terms of our financial situation here. What will success look like? I would say that trying to keep the city being listened to and involved, and so the people and the businesses and the organisations know they're heard, and that somehow we can get through this together, because it is going to be a nightmare. To have a projected cut of £33 million next year on top of our budget pressures this year, and we're not getting much. Yes, we got help for the pandemic from the government, but in terms of going back to the Marmot stuff about health inequalities and general inequalities, it's going in the wrong direction. That's the start of an answer.
Okay. Councillor Connor and then Councillor Brandt.
Thank you, Chair. Jane, I was just wondering if you've got an update on the procurement strategy and what timescales are attached for that to be embedded or introduced into the council. And then also just around the comments that you made around the management for council assets or commercial assets. Is there an improvement plan in place then? And again, is the timescales attached to when we will be able to see more detail on that?
I can bring that back, Chair, to the committee. It's a good point, because all of the improvement plan, which is a big piece of work, that includes the council assets in there, and there's massive detail going through all of that. And obviously that's what the commissioners are looking at, and they've got their various themes. But yeah, because that will also link back to Councillor Harvey's question before about what will it look like, what would success look like as well. So yeah, fair point.
Councillor Bright, is your question related to the budget? Do you want to leave it to then? Is that all right? Yeah. Are there any other questions on the cabinet update as it is? The only comment I would say, just make it. Thanks for your update, Councillor Corbett. I think the only thing I would say is I don't think it is uncharted territory. We've had to, as a council, deal with a reducing budget, and we start off with deficit budgets when we're budget planning starting from 11 years ago, but getting progressively worse year on year. I get last year we had a 1 year settlement as well, and next year probably be the same, which is really which is really difficult. But we'll come back if we come back to there be a lot more questions around the budget and the setting
The point was we got to a point of it being extreme. The point is that we're now in a point where austerity is now extreme. That's what I mean by uncharted territory.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much for the report. So if we move on to then item on the agenda, it's item 8, the outstanding commercial debt review. And if we take that now, and then after that we take the best value inspection, the commissioner costs and costs related to that after that. So who are you speaking on that? You taking that now? Okay.
First of all, you're okay. Yeah.
To say, rather than go through the report, is there if you want to just summarise the report briefly, and then if there's anything in addition to that?
Okay.
Yeah, because it was helpful having the report in advance of the top.
Thank you. First of all, Lee Kinder passes his apologies on to the committee. He's away on annual leave at the moment, so couldn't be here tonight to answer some of your questions. So bear with me, I am not a technical expert in this area. Lee Kinder is our technical expert on it, but I will try to answer your questions. So the report sets out that we have 400 properties that are under lease with a rent roll of 9.6 million. We also levy service charges or insurance premiums on a further 86 properties. That totals 850 a year. We have had, since April 2020, some difficulties with collecting some of the rents, mainly due to the pandemic and the legislation that was put in place around that, which didn't allow us to carry on with debt recovery in those areas. We also took some decisions with some of the tenants to defer their rent payments for the period because their businesses were struggling as a result of the pandemic, and being able to defer that rent until the next quarter for it then to become payable or with a repayment plan seemed the most appropriate way for us as a council to deal with that and keep properties in business. Those decisions were all taken as part of the emergency powers that are part of the remit that's in the Constitution when you're in an emergency situation like the initial pandemic. So there is legislation in place now as part of the Coronavirus Act 2020 that means we have to operate under the commercial rent arrears recovery pieces that are in there. So that does mean that we've got currently outstanding £3 million worth of pandemic debt. We've got disputed debt of 2.5 million, and then debt that's actively being pursued of 1.5 million. Not all of that debt will relate to this financial year. Some will relate to last year. So it's not a case of the 9.6 million, all that debt relates to the current year. That's not the case. There will be some that relates to previous years. So if that's okay, I'll leave it there and let you ask questions.
Thanks, Mel. Thank you. Councillor Makinson, Councillor Brandt, Councillor Crone.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the point of the disputed debt, £2.5 million, how much of that is actually being pursued, and maybe give an indication of how that differs from the debt under the being pursued category?
So whilst a debt is in dispute, we don't continue to send recovery letters out, and that's the difference. Where we're talking to people, or there's a debt recovery plan in place, that's the debt actively being pursued. So there'll be some debt there that have planned recovery in place, whereas the disputed debt is the one where we are negotiating over who owns that debt.
How much of that debt is actually being written off? Has any of that debt been written off, or is that under a separate category? For instance, where businesses have been dissolved and can't be recovered?
So at the moment, none of the debt is being written off. If debt is to be written off, it will depend on the amount, and we'll write it off in line with the corporate debt management policy. So the likelihood is Cabinet will see that debt write-off and approve that or not.
Councillor Brandt.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's probably important to say, even if we write the debt off, it doesn't mean we don't continue to chase it. If it is owing and we think it's still owing, we just write it off for balance sheet purposes on the assumption that we don't think we're going to get it. An initial point, I should say that the pandemic is causing all kinds of problems in the commercial landlord and tenant market because of the government suspension effectively of any form of landlord recovery. And the truth is that some of the businesses who are currently not paying may not survive subsequently. And it follows that and this is not just affecting the council, this is affecting commercial landlords and indeed pension plans and all the rest of it up and down the country about the amount of debt that's being incurred on commercial landlord and tenant arrangements, with the landlords effectively being prevented from any form of enforcement over that particular time. I wanted to just say, however, that I think to some extent the council, Liverpool, has been the victim of some of Eric Pickles' policies of saying, let's cut the back office, because frankly, no one likes lawyers and no one likes people who sit there in the back office just assessing leases and drafting and rolling over and negotiating new tenancies. But I think we're seeing the actual fact that it's a false economy to do that, because you end up not managing your estate properly as an organisation. I wanted to ask how many of the commercial properties that we currently have, we're currently landlord for, are on holding over, rolled over business tenancies, and how many have been renegotiated? You may not know the answer to that question. Okay, I can see you don't. I mean, it would be helpful to know that, because putting it very simply, if the lease has expired its term and it's just rolling over, there's a non-negligible chance that if we invoked the statutory procedure, we'll get a higher rent. And effectively, therefore, we're losing out by not analysing and reviewing those tenancies. Those leases, which is money that we would never get back, because you need to have the lease renewed on the higher rent. The other question is in relation to entities that are come to the end of their lease or serve their own notice. How actively do we enforce dilapidations clauses? Because nearly always we will have the opportunity of doing that. My experience in my professional life is that if you don't have a landlord on top of the issue, the thing can just run away from you, and there's a lot of money at stake on those issues. There's a comment in the report about the difficulty of enforcing these things through the courts. I would, again, this is probably a technical issue, but the Business and Property Court in Liverpool is brilliant. They're turning stuff around within 24 hours right at the moment. You can get, compared to London, you get an excellent service here as an organisation. I think we ought to be supporting it locally, and we would get a lot of judgments and orders very quickly if we did so. So it would be helpful to know the issue about dilapidations, etc. as well. Just finally, in terms of much of the commercial estate or some of the commercial estate is not let on a commercial basis. You will know I've got one. You may not know. Lee certainly knows, and the cabinet member knows. There's one particular example in my ward where a community-based organisation are occupying commercial premises. They've been served with a notice requiring them to pay commercial rent. They won't be able to pay it. They'll just stop operating if they can. I can understand that's exactly the kind of thing you would do if you were coming in without a really actively managed estate. You just send out a letter to everybody. Are you satisfied that we have sufficient resources available to properly manage the estate going forward, both the arrears but also prospectively in terms of the rent review clauses that will regularly need to be reviewed and the rent notices served, upgrading any rents that would otherwise be payable, and the dilapidations at the end of the clauses? Do you think you need more in-house resources to do that? Or do you think we should get external support to temporarily clear the backlog?
Okay, so I think there are 2 or 3 questions. One was around rent review, the impact of staff reductions on the collection of rent, the issue of about dilapidation.
Yep.
And
how many properties are on rollover tenancies?
Yeah.
How many properties have reached the end of their fixed term and are we actively pursuing dilapidations clauses? How many properties have passed the rent review clause stage and we haven't actively reviewed the rent? And how many have we got which are actually let on non-commercial terms, albeit that they form part of our commercial property?
Well, can I take Councillor Crone's question as well, because you probably won't be able to answer any of these, I'm guessing, because Lee's not here. But yeah, Councillor Crone.
Thanks, Chair. You probably won't be able to answer mine either, to be honest. But on point 2.6, it says the council has to balance its duties to recover income with the societal cost for business in the pandemic. And I thought that was quite an interesting line, and I wondered if you knew much about how the council is balancing those things. For example, I could imagine we could say like a local business owned by a Liverpool resident might be a bit more gentle and give them more time to pay compared to a multinational or a national company that might be better resourced. So I just wondered what sort of things are being considered in respect of that.
I know Councillor Corbett wants to come in. Do you want to take Mel's answer first and then come back to you? Yeah.
That's a test of memory as well. The facts and figures, I will get you the answer on. In terms of the number of staff, we have been out to recruit recently for 5 additional surveyors. We were only able to recruit to 2 of those posts. So I do think there is still an under-resource in that area, but we are actively looking at the interim market and for temporary staff to come into that area to help us get through the backlog of rent reviews and lease reviews. In terms of dilapidations, we do where we can pursue dilapidations. It does, as you'll be aware, depend on the circumstances of the lease ending. And if the business isn't trading anymore, then there is little point in pursuing dilapidations on it. But we do where we can actively pursue those dilapidations. In terms of the point at 2.26 on societal impacts, what we do, and that's what I was referring to around the deferred rents, is when people request that, we look at the impact on the council of deferring the rent versus the impact on the economy and the society in Liverpool of deferring the rent. So if by doing that we can retain jobs and retain an active business, then we've deferred the rents. And then when it comes to pursuing the debt, we look at ability to pay. So those companies that have the ability to pay, we will pursue more rigorously than those we think need a repayment plan instead.
Thanks, Mel. Councillor Corbett.
Thanks, Chair. A couple of bits, the capacity inside the council, the back office question, yeah. And that's what is very, very difficult for us now, because we've got to make these £33 million cuts. And how do we then balance having the resources inside so we get the income that we need with actually keeping the front line going? and we have to debate that ourselves in council, in the political parties, and come up with some sort of way of doing that. I'm determined that we can try, because I know I use this phrase, but the back doors have been blown off, removed. We're open, and we're trying to lock that down. We're not open now because the last 2 years, particularly since the new chief executive's come in and the property asset management has been transferred over to the finance director, has made a huge difference. However, we are still needing to show exactly that we know how much we should be getting in, what the leases, where they are, who's got them, what you said before about when they're due to either be extended or redone. It's one of the big things that came out in the Cala report. It's really crucial that if we decide to take less than a market rent, that we show the process of that. So we've got to start off with knowing what that market rent is. So we show that we know what that is. And it goes back to Councillor Crone's point before about picking up in the report about societal impact. If, for example, we're saying, OK, there's a strong community network there that is using a council asset. If we don't let them do that, we know what will happen. If it's a boxing club or a community centre or whatever it is, we know what the difference will make in terms of not just monetary value, but actually impact on the ground. So, and that's where we're pushing for purpose-led businesses rather than profit-led businesses. But yeah, back office is crucial, as you know.
Councillor Connor.
Thank you, Chair. It was just on your comment, Mel, about deferred payments. Can you just confirm that they will be pursued, so that debt will be pursued regardless of circumstances? And then just the other comment is, am I correct from the report that while there's a 9 million rent roll for commercial properties and over a 850k service charge that the council have on rent roll, the actual sum for the actual debt is 7 million, which is outstanding. And just in terms of, I know it details about around the recovery and questions are being asked this evening, but my concern around the 7 million is that we're entering a consultation around council budgets with our residents and partners across the city. And I just think if we're going into those talks saying that we've got 7 million of commercial debt, which is private businesses and companies that, you know, haven't paid rent to the council, and yet we're looking to possibly cut future services, I think we need to have a good response to that question.
So yes, we pursue and put repayment plans in place for all that we can. Of course, as has been mentioned previously, some of the businesses where the rent's been deferred may not be in business post-pandemic. So then that becomes a write-off situation for us. But yes, we actively pursue where we can, and put the first step is always to try and get the money back as soon as possible and get the arrears cleared as soon as possible. If the business can't do that, we will put that repayment plan in place.
Okay, there's no other question. A couple of things. I had a couple of observations. So if our annual rent roll is 9.6 million and there's 7 million of that outstanding, so does that mean that there's 73% of our rent that we haven't collected?
I think I said previously that not all of that debt relates to this year, so it's 9.6 per annum, but the debt that's detailed doesn't just relate to this year.
Okay, because the other thing was that which was partly pulled out of the in the best value report that suggested that there was an outstanding rent debt of 7 million because we didn't have enough staff, but actually there's a number of different reasons for that, aren't there, that you've described today. One is making the decision to defer rent payments to try and support the sustainability of local businesses, and there's others that are currently in dispute, as well as those that are in arrears. So I think, because what's not clear in the report though is how long some of this debt has been outstanding for, and how long these apart from the pandemic debt, the disputed debts have been disputed for. And I think it would be useful for the committee to know that, because because the final question was, and we've kind of suggested that, is what impact this has on our budget.
In terms of edge debtor list, we can get you that, but we won't be able to get you that for next meeting. We implemented a new system to start to track these properly, because before they weren't on any kind of IT system. So we've implemented that now, but as a consequence, the debts are there. So we'll need to go back to paper records to get that edge debt list for you, but we can do that. It will just give us a little bit of time to do it, please. What I'm asking.
Okay, but does that mean we don't know who owes us what
No.
debt?
We do know who owes us what debt, but to get the time, the actual time, so to tell you whether it's 4 or 5 years old, we will need to check paper records, because according to the electronic system, it is 12 months old.
Okay, and do we know then whether all those organisations are still trading?
Yeah, we do know that they're still trading.
And I think as well as that, I think what feeling around for is what we can pursue actively that will support our budget settlement for next year. I think that's part of what's obviously critical here. If there was £7 million and we could get, which we obviously I don't think we will, but if we could get £7 million between now and next March, that would come into our budget, wouldn't it?
No, it's already accounted for in the budget figures that we're proposing, that the debt will come in.
So in the budget it's proposed £7 million.
Pressure.
Okay, so there's £7 million. That £7 million is budgeted, is included in the budget forecast for next year. So if we don't get the £7 million, then that's an additional deficit added to the deficit. Is that right?
Potentially, there'll be some bad debt provision already set aside against some of those arrears. So not all of it will impact, but there'll be a continuous review of the debts and the bad debt provision. That generally is done towards the end of the financial year.
I'm just wondering what's included in the budget and what's not included in the budget. But at the moment, all the £7 million is actually in. It's assumed that money's going to come in. Are there any further questions on that? So if we can have as many answers to the questions as we can before the next meeting, Councillor Cole.
Just to say that the improvement plan, I think, is going to the audit committee. So that'll be reviewed regularly, and that's where some of this will be within that as well. So you've got your streams looking at property asset management, for example, and obviously you can pull whoever it is, the cabinet. Sorry, not you, but the chair, Chris Brown can bring the various cabinet members in to discuss those improvement themes, and some of that will be in there. And yes, of course, we want to try and get our debt back, and it's how we do that. And what's appalling is that to say that is the level of debt now when we're in financial crisis is really bad.
Okay. So what I'll do is, if I from the questions that have been asked to provide more information, I'll go through those with Mike and so we can either say I get a response, or when that response will come back, I'll follow that up. Okay. Can we move on to the Commissioner's costs?
So the report that's in front of you sets out the cost of the commissioners and the initial costs of the project, the increase in project management team that is needed to manage the improvement plan. In this financial year, the costs of the commissioners will be funded from a reserve. And as a consequence, all additional costs of the commissioner, because we're expecting there will be more on top of this, will be subject to a cabinet report. The current expected cost of the commissioners is 494k in this financial year, rising to 600k in 22-23 and 23-24, and then some residual of 106k. So in total, £1.8 million. And then there is the PMO costs that you will see for an extra 5 officers to help support the programme and make sure we deliver on time on the improvement plan.
So what's PMR?
Sorry, project managers.
Okay, for different elements of each element of the improvement plan. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you want to respond before I've got Councillor Makinson? Yeah, and then Councillor Brandt.
Thank you, Chair. Is the day rate based on a full working day, or is it like the old attendance allowances where they get paid the full rate even if at the extreme it was a 5-minute Zoom
meeting? They have to sign in.
It's based on the days they spend in Liverpool or working on Liverpool items.
I think the purpose behind the question is that monitored, and who monitors it?
MHCLG monitor it.
So that would actually include a Zoom meeting, potentially? Right.
Mr. Brandt.
Thanks. I was just wondering, are the commissioners employed by government department, or are they self-employed entities who we pay directly? And if we're with the latter, is it on a PAYE basis, or are they coming to us as part of these service companies which reduced employers' national insurance contributions?
It depends on which of the commissioners you look at, because they all have different employment circumstances. So I can take that offline with you.
Okay,
I don't know how much I'm allowed to disclose these personal circumstances.
Right. I just remember fondly Eric Pickles having a right go at senior officers and councils who provided their services through service companies.
Good question. Councillor Corbett.
Part of your answer, Councillor Brandt, is on page 41.43 and 44. So, for example, one of the commissioners is serving Chief Executive Surrey, and then the other one's yeah. Okay, all right. But some of it does on that part of the report. Okay, I think the key thing for us is that we focus in on getting the improvement plan and the overall improvement plan and their board so well supported and us moving so quickly, which we are moving incredibly quickly, that we get the commissioners out the door as quickly as possible. To be perfectly blunt, and one of the things that is crucial for that is that we agree early doors what best value is, so that there's an agreement there, so that what we don't do is slow the process down as things come through, because they oversee quite a lot of this stuff, particularly in specific areas. So there needs to be a really clear agreement there, which we're getting to.
Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chair. Sometimes these figures kind of blow your mind, don't they? So let me get this right. The government-imposed commissioners, who are accountable, it seems, to nobody, are going to cost us more than £2 million in add-ons and their costs. And there's no accountability of that. There's no scrutiny. Are we able to scrutinise the work they do? We are challenged as councillors and as a city council to actually scrutinise decisions in these select committees. Can we set up a scrutiny panel that looks at the spend and what they're doing? Otherwise, how are these accountable to the people who've elected us? There's no accountability at all. Surely there's a way that we can bring these commissioners to this committee and question them on the work they do. Otherwise, you know, what is the point on us doing this? We're playing games. This is a £2 million cost. We were listening to the Deputy Mayor rightly pointing out the levels of austerity. When are we going? How are we going to hold this to account? £2 million with no accountability and no questioning and no accountability to the electorate? Can we set it up? So my rambling come to a question. Can we set up some sort of scrutiny panel via this committee to look at the work they do?
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. The short answer is no. The commissioners are appointed by and accountable to the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government through the Secretary of State under the directions made under primary legislation. The commissioners, as I said, are accountable directly to the Secretary of State and Government. Their activities and remit is not subject to oversight by the City Council, though the directions and the legislation require that we pay the expenses as set out within the report. It's not our role to scrutinise the work and role of the commissioners, nor can we require them to attend in that capacity. That's not the nature of this type of intervention, nor do we have any remit or any legal justification or ability to do so.
But presumably we can get a regular account of how much it's costing the council, at the very least. And then presumably there are questions MPs could ask of MHCLG about the commissioners and what they're doing, presumably.
As is the case with any form of intervention type such as this, commissioners will produce updates which will be submitted to government as to the progress on their activities against the requirements of the directions. I would expect that to be either a quarterly or 6 monthly basis, probably the former, and that will continue, that will actually commence in the coming months once the commissioners have settled their views as to the current state of the City Council and its progress again in the context of our draft improvement plan and the work progressing against that. In terms of costs associated with commissioners, again, as the directors indicated already, any additional costs beyond those from the reserve will be addressed through further reports to Cabinet, which again will come forward to this committee as well.
But I think what we're asking for is an update what the costs of the commissioners have been or are at each select committee meeting.
I think that's important. I think we need to be really honest here, though, and say they wouldn't be in our city overseeing what we're doing in certain areas of the council, not all areas, in certain areas of the council, if we'd have done it right. There's a history of where we haven't done it right, and that's why they're here. Now, we've been doing it right for the last couple of years, really hardcore, straight through. But the capacity as well, we're having to put money. That's why the spending freeze has been there as well, and there's reserves there, and we're trying to backfill that, and we've got extra resources there. But let's not kid ourselves that, oh, they've suddenly turned up because they want to take over Liverpool. They haven't. They've been sent here because there were certain areas of our council that were not functioning properly, and they will be hopefully out the door as quickly as we can get them out the door when we show them that they are now functioning properly, and we've already started that process. And that improvement plan is incredibly detailed. We meet as cabinet members with the various commissioners. We've had 2 meetings with them as a cabinet. I've got another meeting coming up with an individual one. So we know what's happening. They need to know what's happening, and they do know what's happening. That gets reported back through one of the top civil servants directly through. So they oversee them as well. But I think we just need to be careful. I understand what you're saying, Councillor Mitchell, in terms of who oversees them and who scrutinises them. At the moment, we've still got the power. We have the power here. They are overseeing what we're doing. If they've got concerns, they will raise those concerns, and things won't be signed off until they're happy with what we're doing. And that's their function. And we can't get away from that. What really galls, though, is that we've had so many cuts down the years that our back office is almost in shreds, and we're needing to backfill it. And we're now in that position where we have to pick up the tab. There is no responsibility from the government to say, oh, we've cut you so much that yes, it's probably likely that quite a lot of your back office is now out because you need to protect the front line, and we're picking up the tab. So you're quite right in saying, can we please see exactly how this is panning out in terms of the finances? But we have to be really careful here because we want to make sure that we're doing this right, and we are doing it right. But what we can't do is spend endless amounts of hours and hours expecting officers to try and respond back when they actually need to focus on getting this right so we can get the commissioners out the door as quickly as possible.
Councillor Byrne?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been covered, to be fair, Chair, but I think we have got a real political issue if we're going to, and you think about, obviously, the citizen support scheme and what that costs, and if we've got to offset it with 0.6 million to commissions, it's going to be a real issue in the city politically, I think, for the council, how we're going to justify that. And I think Councillor Mitchell made a really good point. The lack of accountability will be something that will land on our doorsteps, because everybody will be asking, what are you actually doing for the money? So I think there's a real issue there, and I think we need to ask the commissioners for more accountability in absolutely extraordinary circumstances, because have they actually come into a council before which has faced so much misery coming down the pipeline? You know, and you made a point there, Jane, which is true. There was undoubtedly mistakes highlighting the calorie report, but there have been other local authorities which have been in the same boat, and they didn't send the commissioners in. So I think we need to bear that in mind as well.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions on this item? Okay. All right, thank you for that. So if we move on to the budget then, which is obviously our main item, can we? I don't know how long the presentation is, because given the roadworks of this city, this was coming for the end, at least the half of it. But can we? I think what's important is for us to ask questions. So if we can keep the presentation to around 15 minutes at the most, and then leave as much time as we can then to ask for members to ask questions. Okay, are you doing the presentation?
I'm giving the backdrop to it, but you still got the revenue monitoring to look at, haven't you, as well?
Yeah.
So you want to take time for that? Okay, so what we've tried to do here, this is very early doors, okay, and we're trying to make sure that everybody sees the position that we're in, understands the national context, understands the local context, understands the assumptions that we're trying to work from. And going back to your point before, Councillor Harvey, about trying to make sure that people are included in this. But before that can start, we need to say this is a setting of the scene, okay? Mel, I don't know whether you want to just rattle through this so that people can see where we're up to. And I don't know how you want to play it, Chair, whether you want to stop as you're going through or whichever way you want to do it, it's fine.
I think it's probably better to go through the presentation, then we'll take questions. I think is that agreed? But the committee, is that the way, seems the best way of doing it? But if we could go through it as quickly as we can, and then a lot of the stuff will come out through questions anyway.
I'll only cut in about twice, I think, on the local context, that's it.
Well, can you put your mic on?
There we go. On the national context, we've of course facing high levels of uncertainty with furlough, potential further lockdowns, and then the full implications of Brexit. We've got inflation running at 2.4% at the moment. That could lead to potential interest rate changes for us. The government have got an unexpected 303 billion deficit from 2021 down to COVID. Employment as a nation, we're looking at shortages in hospitality and health and social care, which may see a move from health and social care into hospitality, which will have bigger implications for us as a council. The comprehensive spending review last year was only 1 year. We're not expecting to see that announced until later in the year. The fair funding review has been deferred again, and the social care green paper we're still awaiting for. Layer on top of that COP26 and the likelihood that there will be some responsibilities placed on us around climate change as
sorry,
well.
Mark, can you explain COP? Just what COP is?
I don't actually know what COP stands for, but it's the climate change meeting and convention that's going on in Glasgow. But I don't know what the abbreviation is. So if anybody does know, please inform me.
Climate something anyway, probably.
Chair, I think it's Conference of the Parties, isn't it? I think that's what it is.
Thank you.
You should know, you're the Green Councillor.
Next slide, Mike. So from a local context, we need to consider how we set our budget around the triple lock. that's in place on equality, climate change and social value. There is also an aspiration for a real living wage and hours within the city, and that we conduct ourselves around the principles of better business. We are, as a city, heavily dependent on the hospitality sector. Just under 50% of our business rates comes from that sector. So we do need to make sure that that is a sustainable sector for us. I think we've talked already about areas of the council which need bolstering, those not being the traditional social care frontline type areas. And then we've got the unknown longer term implications for us of the pandemic around the economy and what's going to happen with the economy in Liverpool, around employment, education, demand and costs. Next slide, please. So what are the assumptions we've made around setting the budget? We've made the assumption that 100% business rate retention will continue for us. We've made the assumption that council tax demand will remain static. We have at the moment put a 0% increase in on council tax. However, that is a political debate for you to have. Pay inflation is at 1.5%, increasing to 3% in the latter years. We've put a 2% increase on the levies that we pay around transport and waste. We've made the assumption capital does not cause any further revenue pressures to us. There is a sum of money built in for some capital growth, but we're saying there's no revenue pressures beyond that. Non-pay inflation, we've assumed increases up to 3% based around the current levels of inflation. New Homes Bonus, which is a grant that comes from government, we've made the assumption that will not continue or be replaced. It was only given to us as a further 1 year at the last settlement, and the government have said that will be phased out. We've made the assumption that income from fees and charges will continue at the current rate that's in the budget, not at the current rate of income that we're getting, because some of that we're not charging for because of the pandemic at the moment, and that's being offset by a fees and charges grant from government. So we are assuming it will continue at the budgeted level. We're also making the assumption that capital receipts flexibilities will not continue. Capital receipts flexibilities were given to us 5 years ago around being able to use capital receipts to fund transformational revenue projects. Normally, as a council, we cannot use capital monies to fund any revenue programme. They can only be spent on assets of the council. So the assumption going forward is that those capital receipts flexibilities fall away. Mike? Thank you. Some further grant assumptions that we've made in there. Social care grant of 26 million will continue, is the assumption we've made. Improved Better Care Fund of 34 million is currently included in our business rate retention scheme. So that is assumed to either continue or be replaced by a grant. New Homes Bonus of 5 million, I've talked about not continuing. There is a small grant that we got last year as part of being a lower tier, providing lower tier services as well as upper tier ones, and we're assuming that will not continue. Public health grant of 45 million, we are assuming will continue, but we're also assuming it will be ring-fenced to public health still. And then the £8 million of local council tax support funding will not continue for us, is the assumption. Mike? So in terms of where we're at now and where we're forecasting our budget position to be, in the budget repair papers that went in March, there was a balance already forecast in there of 21 million. We then need to add in the pay inflation from the 1.5%. We have got some non-pay inflation this year that we haven't needed to distribute, so we can offset the pay inflation with non-pay. Non-pay is spent on supplies and services into the council. We've removed the previously assumed 1.99% council tax increase. There are some unachieved and one-off savings proposals at £2.8 million that need to go back into the gap. And then we've got pressures already identified of 4 million. Some of that is funding around bolstering the back office services to be able to deliver the improvement plan. Mike? That's the indicative timetable for the budget setting process. So there'll be a report to Cabinet in October, is our ambition, with some proposals in there, if not all, to help close the budget gap. Then we'll begin formal consultation towards the end of October. That'll run through until January time, when it will end, and then we will revisit the proposals following consultation, and then the budget will proceed through to full council at the beginning of March for us. You can see the provisional local government finance settlement, PLGFS, we're predicting will come around December time, which is when it usually arrives. So that's when we will know the funding we have.
Thank you. Thanks, Mel. Do you want to?
Just 2 points, basically. One is on that last one on the indicative timetable. What is really worrying again is that we won't know our local government settlement until December. So again, we're going into going with our without being able to see where we're going really, and also it'll only be for a year. So yet again, the fair funding review has been, by the looks of it, has been pushed forward for another 2 years away. And also comprehensive spending review. So we're likely to just keep going on that 1 year at a time, which is not good for financial planning in any stretch of the imagination.
Okay, I'll throw it open to questions then from the floor. So, Councillor Shortall, Councillor Brandt, Councillor Crone.
Yeah, I have a question in terms of the council tax support, 8.2 million, that will not be continued. Council tax support is often for the poorest of people, and this is going to send them into more debt. And I'm really concerned about it because I've been a recipient of it myself in the past. And we're removing that, and all we're doing is put more debt on people. We've got the water rates, the lecky bills going up, bills are going up, and the income coming in is going down. And in my ward in particular, 4 out of 10 children are actually in poverty. That's a stat from the Mayor's office. And 2 in 10 are unemployed or on hour work benefit. So this is going to put them more into debt. And look, we've got 7 million of rent roll that potentially some of that debt won't be paid, and we're writing it off. You can't write off council tax debt. They chase you and pursue you all the time. And I know we live on what business rates we get in, but this is just taking it a bit too far for my liking. I'm really concerned about it.
Can I take a couple of questions first, and then we'll take response to that? Is that all right?
We'll be watching online to see the answer to that one. And the answer is we're not taking it away. It's the government that are not giving us that. So it says local council tax support funding. This is the grant assumption. So it's the grants from the government. And in fact, we've got a very strong system in place to make sure that we don't we pursue, but we don't aggressively pursue, whatever the terminology is, William. But it's really carefully and very sensitively done. Where you're right, where people are already in debt, it's some of that debt that they can't manage, and then what we're going to put even more debt on them. So it's a fine balancing act, but we're actually, in terms of protecting our most vulnerable people in the city, we've got a very, very good track record, one of the best in the country. It's the government taking that away, not us.
So the reference really is that it's the government are not going to continue with the council tax support grant that they had previously, right? And not the additional money that we add to that to provide the additional support to extend the support. Okay. The Councillor Brandt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It probably is worth just reiterating that last point. You're not suggesting, I think the Cabinet member is saying that we're going to get rid of the council tax support scheme. What you're saying is that the grant money that we get that partly funds that, we are assuming at the moment, or planning on the assumption that we won't get it. Okay, well, first of all, I just want to say well done, by the way, for talking about setting the budget this early in the year. When I was on the cabinet, we never got around to having these presentations until much later in the year. So congratulations to you for doing that. You are right, of course, though, that the hard constraint is that we won't actually know the government's allocation until December or sometimes January. Just a couple of questions in relation to the assumptions that were on there. Am I correct in assuming that there is an assumption within that budget set of figures that there will be no additional social care supplement available to be charged out as part of council tax? Yeah, okay, which would levy us, what, another 4 million or something along those lines if we were to levy it and it was coming in collection? Okay. Similarly, you've indicated, if I understood correctly, that the fees and charges have not been uprated. The normal process is that the budget planning assumptions are that we do uprate them at CPI level, is it not? Or Peter will know the answer to that. So I just want to know, is that a change in the assumptions, or if that isn't a change in the normal budget planning assumptions, if we were to put the fees and charges up by inflation, what impact would that make on the bottom line of that budget gap? Thirdly, you indicated that there was no additional pressure on the revenue grant from the capital programme. Has the capital board met yet? Because at the moment there is a future years surplus in the capital programme that will need to be trimmed back if there's not going to be an effect on the revenue programme. So I suppose I'm asking, how confident are you that that assumption is a robust one? And then very finally, although you mentioned the Better Care Fund, what's your view on a planning basis about the improved Better Care Fund sums that come in on the Section 75 basis currently through the CCG as to where we will be in relation to the moving to an integrated care system with the Cheshire and Mersey footprint? Has that played a part at the moment, or yeah? Those are my questions.
Okay. So to take the £8 million one first, if we were to receive the £8 million grant from government, that would reduce our budget gap by £8 million. So take it down to 25. Because we're keeping the council tax scheme going, that's why it becomes that 8 million becomes the pressure. Fees and charges, we've assumed a static rate at the moment. To increase where we can would give us in the region of about £1 million. There are some things that we can't increase because the amount you can charge for them are dictated to us in legislation. And there are some things that we charge for where we have to ring fence the money that comes in. Capital Board has met. There has been an assessment of projects, and we are bringing that through to Cabinet once that we have got the outlined business cases and the detail that will enable Cabinet to assess what are the right schemes to then take forward. So I am quietly confident that we will be able to deliver on the capital element of it, as well as actively pursuing external funding to help to continue schemes over and above what we've got available to us in the revenue programme. IBCF, we have assumed we will continue with IBCF. We know there is a risk to that because of the proposed changes with the NHS, but for the moment we have assumed that will continue until we know more.
One other question I just want to ask, which is, I assume, and this is more of a political question, I suppose, really, I assume that because of it's an annual budget process, you decided not to go down a zero-based budget approach for at least this year. Yeah. And
to be honest with you, that we'd need a lot more people inside the council to be able to pull that together as well. Which, yeah, exactly. So we're doing the best that we can, but what we're trying to make sure is that we've got the set of principles there that we hang on to, and we were determined to hang on to them at the same time as pushing back on government, at the same time as looking internally and saying we need to do better here, here and here as well. So, yeah, it's difficult.
Okay, I've got Councillor Crone and then I've got Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. Mel, could you just sort of enlighten me a bit? You used the word assumptions a few times, so you've assumed that you won't be getting certain grants. So to what extent have you been hinted? Have you been told that it's likely that they won't exist anymore, or did they always have a kind of shelf life those grants? So I just wondered whether that's just, you know, you being pessimistic and portraying a worst case scenario. So that's one thing. The capital receipt flexibilities will not continue. Again, is that something that you've been kind of told and indicated by government that that's going to end? And I just wonder as well how much we made use of that, because I thought it was quite an interesting concept. Did we have many projects in Liverpool utilising that flexibility? And just finally, I noticed in the table of different savings, I noticed a few things, but one thing stood out at me, that you were within planning considering creating a streamlined process for tree applications. I hope that doesn't mean it will become easier to cut down trees in Liverpool.
So I'll take everything bar the last point.
Yeah.
So we haven't begun anything hard and fast by central government. What we have been given in the previous settlement is an indication of whether something is 1 year only, and it's only been rolled forward for 1 year. So we have used that information to inform the assumptions we've made. Are we being pessimistic? I would come back and say we're being balanced, because there are some things that may continue that we've assumed will stop. But then there are other things that may reduce that we have assumed will continue at the current level. So I'd say that we're probably being balanced. The bit that we haven't fed in yet is around any further pressures other than that 4 million we've identified. So the assumption is the £9 million that is in the revenue budget is that we will be able to deal with that and deal with it on a recurrent basis. Some of it is related to COVID that we're seeing in there. So that hasn't been fed in to any pressures from that, has not been fed into those assumptions. So I would say that we are being balanced.
Sorry, there was one question about the budget, the capital flexibilities and how much we made use of that in Liverpool.
Yep. Peter will have the figures on that one, or have I just passed you an hospital pass to make 5 mil, is it?
Yeah, it's on average, it's about 5 million per annum. It's been an average of about 5 million every year that it's been around. So I think this year it's actually a bit less than 5 million. So I can get you the figures, the exact figures.
We do publish it as part of the budget report and the capital report that we do, because you have to publish what your flexibilities are and what you're using them for as part of the agreement with government to be able to utilise them.
I've got Councillor Harvey, then I'll come back to Councillor Byrne.
Thanks, Chair. I'm really concerned about the fact that we don't know what our government budget package is yet.
Sorry, can you? Yeah.
So I'll start that again. So I'm really concerned that we don't know what our budget package is for the next financial year is yet. And the government keep giving us 1 year packages at a time, and the implications this has for our city. I just wanted to know, is this a deliberate act by government, or is it more to do with incompetence? And then I had a secondary question, is there anything we can do as councillors, or is there anything Liverpool's MPs can do in Parliament to get Liverpool a better deal? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Councillor Corbett.
I think I think the government need to make their mind up about certain strategies, including their financial strategies. strategy. It would be useful to have an industrial strategy for a start, one that worked. In terms of medium-term financial planning, if the way that they seem to be going is that they're coming up with a lot of grant streams, one-off grant streams. Now, while they're useful, what that does for us internally, which comes straight back to the back office issue, is we have to manage those grants as they come in. And we will do that, and we have done that, but it is incredibly labour intensive. Whereas actually, if you know what's coming and it's not 1 year bits and pieces of grants, you can plan ahead. I think personally, and this is just me speaking because you've asked the question, I think they don't quite know where they're going yet. They've got this huge debt, but actually they need to make a decision about how they manage that. Because they could push it right the way carefully down the line, so that by the time you pay it off, it's a lot further down and it doesn't hurt the economy and people so much. I think they have, and because they haven't made their mind up, they're doing it bit by bit by bit. And that is, I think they need to be a lot more responsible. We do as well. We've said that before, but they have to be more responsible, and they have to show what their thinking is. I can't see what their thinking is. That they're coming with bits and pieces, and it's not fair on local government. And just to finish on, I think local government has had huge cuts as an area within government, and at some point the government have got to recognise, and certainly through the pandemic, the government did recognise the value of local government. Certainly Michael Marmot does, but I think they've got to change their thinking on that. And until that happens, I think we will be stuck like we are. I'm really worried.
Councillor Byrne, and then Councillor Crofts.
Yeah, it's just a million with regards to the capital board and the potential schemes that are coming online. Are we still going to be, as a council, looking to invest to earn, which has been very successful over the last 10 years? Are they going to be, is there a time scale where they've got to start making sure that these projects go forward? Because it seems to be a halt in the city at the moment. Certainly if we're looking at council house building, seems to be very quiet on some of the schemes that were originally mooted. We look at Stonebridge Cross. So just what sort of role are the commissioners doing in stymieing any sort of move forward for the desperately needed investment that we need? And just to pick up what Lucille said, the ACLG committee and the LGA in July have called for fair settlements, long-term settlements, because we can't plan as not just Liverpool, right across the board within the LGA, and it's been called for. The government haven't responded yet. That was in the July report, that Councillor Harvey. So we'll wait the response.
So I'll take those questions, and I'll come to Councillor Crofts.
AREMA Invest to Earn, the government put further restrictions on councils being able to borrow to invest in commercial properties. So we did have £50 million set aside for commercial investment, which we had to halt at that point. We will, however, still look at Invest to Earn or Invest to Save that doesn't revolve around the commercial element of properties. So if we can, by investing in something, we can make savings within the revenue budget, we will still look at that. And that's part of the process of drawing up the outline business cases, so we can assess whether investing in that asset will eventually save us money down the line. So, for example, if you do some capital investment in a building, what you do get is savings on repairs and maintenance for a little while. So we will look at things like that as part of that capital board and those outline business cases. In terms of commissioners and their role, the commissioners really inform us what their role is in that process rather than the other way around. And we cannot enter into any agreement or issue any report to Cabinet for decision making until the commissioners are fully satisfied that they have been fully informed of all the facts and they are happy with that decision. So I can't really fully answer the Commissioner question. It will take as long as it takes until they're happy with the decision.
Corbett.
Just in terms of the invest to earn, it's a really important question, and the government, as Mal said before, are tightening massively up on it. But the Public Works Loan Board was set up so that public works could be carried out, and the problem is that where some councils, not ours, not us, have almost abused the system or pushed it to the extent of just purely making money rather than impacting on the area that they're there to serve. So it's pushed it into the limelight in a bad way, which is a real shame because it's such a good scheme. PWLB is really good, which you can see from the logo that we swapped our logo to use PWLB, which was picked up by John McDonald.
Just sorry, before I bring Councillor Crofts in, sorry, Nick, it's just you said the £50 million commercial borrowing, was that, is you referring to the housing capital programme? You're talking about sort of office developments and things like that?
You may
liner related to cruise liner developments.
I don't know if you recall, was it 2 years ago at the budget? 2 years, not last year, the year before. The budget report approved a commercial investment strategy, and there was 50 million set aside for that, for buying assets that generated income for us.
There was if you remember, there was Councillor Byrne, there was a really good discussion in council, and then we raised about purpose-led and purpose-driven business, and we tied that in with that amount, and we had good discussions on that, and that was our discussion around ethical business, ethical use of money, etc.
Councillor Crofts.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I echo Councillor Brandt's welcome for the opportunity to have this discussion at this very early stage, and I welcome as well the indicative timetable and the intent for there to be an inclusive debate with the people of Liverpool about the perilous financial circumstances that the council is in. I do have some concerns, though, about the nature of the questions that are proposed, because they are open questions and they will generate a lot of answers, obviously, but also information that will be useful to us. But it doesn't strike me, Chair, that those questions provide a degree of obviousness about the city standing on the financial precipice. You could imagine those sorts of questions being posed if there were a 30 or indeed 40 million pounds surplus rather than deficit that we're facing into. So I think the important thing for that proposed engagement process to be successful has got to be setting the correct context for the people of Liverpool so that they understand what it is actually that we are asking of them. So referring to, for example, the hundreds of millions of pounds worth of budget that has been removed from the city in the last 11 years, and expressly telling the people of Liverpool that we are facing into a 30+ million pound shortfall. Unless we do that, I think the product of that consultation exercise will not be as helpful to us as it would otherwise be.
Councillor Corbett.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. What we're trying to do is do two things in parallel, and where they can influence each other, then that's great. So, for example, if children say, we want to see how it's on the question of what do we love about our city? I love my school. It's brilliant. They look after me. I'm encouraged to be honest and open and see a future. What would you love to see in our city? I would love to see a clear connection between what I'm learning in school and how that relates to future jobs, but also if I want to set up a business in Liverpool, how does that relate through? What sort of businesses are we looking for? If a child, for example, then says, okay, what would make our city stronger and fairer? For children to be listened to, for their voices to be taken seriously, and for them to be involved. Now, none of those actually relate to our council budget conversation directly. However, listening to those voices and seeing how, as part of the city plan, we work with our education establishments, we work with our businesses, we look at the principles that we work for. We then see as a council how we want to be able to recognise what a good business looks like. And with your background in the co-op, you'll know all of that. How do we do? So it's a wider conversation. And what we're trying to do is make sure that what we don't do is say to people, we are on the cliff edge again, and it's only going to get worse. Yes, we are. And it is going to get worse. However, we want to talk about the future of our city together. So where they interlock and where they can influence each other, great. And yes, it is a risk. However, we've trialled it in a tiny part of Everton, and some of the questions that have been answered really interestingly. And we want to see more housing. We want to see more adapted housing. We want children with autism to be able to have accommodation when they're older that is supportive of their particular needs, but enables them to be supported to be able to have a good job and good income. So there's lots of things that hopefully we will hear and will be brought in, and some of those will relate to the budget and some of them won't. Against that, there will also be slightly later on starting a very clear budget conversation that says, this is really serious. We are now on the cliff edge. So we're trying to do both, Councillor, and it's difficult, but we'll see the responses coming in each week anyway.
Yeah, I sort of tend to agree with Councillor Crofts, really. I don't see why, in a way, we're asking people to express an opinion on things that we can't deliver. When you know, we're probably we might be, you know, cutting back on investment in the city, might be cutting back on services in the city. It just, I'm not sure I'm not sure what purpose that serves.
Okay, because some of the issues are, we don't. Yes, we are the council, but look at the number of people that make up our city: the businesses, the schools, the faith communities, the universities. The answers to those questions quite often will relate to other people than the council. So it's part of the city plan. It's not part of the budget. But where there's clear link-ups, if suddenly there's a very strong message that says, look, we're sick to death of all the fly tipping. Yeah, aren't we all? We're sick to death of picking up Councillor Crone's point before about the trees. If you walk around Everton, you hit the tree branches all the time. So I wish some of the trees would actually be cut down, to be perfectly honest with you, because they're dangerous and then they will fall down. Now, some of those will overlap, but there are others that are the vision for the city, and that's what we're trying to pick up, that relates into the city plan. There's the council plan within the city plan, but what we can do with our partners, and it's wider. It's wider.
Yeah, I accept that, but I think I would sort of advise making those two completely separate processes, questioning your one on the budget and one on
they are
city
they are,
plan,
but where they interlink,
right, rather than okay.
Yeah, they are, but we're doing ours. Those three questions are starting now. They will carry on after the budget consultation starts as well. So it's a bit of a continuous conversation.
Can I ask? I think I saw somewhere that one of the assumptions was a 2.4% increase in rates. Interest rates? Was that? Inflation, right. Okay, right, okay. The other thing is, well, I think, which is pick up some of the political points, was that there's been some success, limited success, but it has brought money into to this council from joining national and regional campaigns that Councillor Byrne partly referred to before, that highlight the issues that councils have, because we're not the only one in this situation. Yeah, we have Northwest, the Northwest councils that come together around education and social care. Make presentations as well with the Association of Directors of Children's Services and the LGA about the growing deficits of. There was a good report in the Guardian today around the national demands, increasing demands on children's social care, for example. And I think what I think was we're looking for is a proactive, positive, aggressive, passionate campaign to highlight specifically where the budget gaps and budget pressures are in the council through no fault of our own. That join with other councils. We have relationships with core cities, with the LGA, with other organisations, through our MPs to take those issues forward. And I think it's kind of partly, I think, in response to what Lucille was talking about. I think it's that, rather than us just waiting passively for the government to decide or not. Obviously, we know what they're going to do to us. They've been doing it to us for the last 11 years. Is to apply that pressure, and as part with key figures as part of campaigns, with regionally, nationally, to embarrass the government into making some kind of improved settlements with some of these things.
Absolutely. That there is no way that any of us in this chamber and beyond, to be perfectly honest, are sitting on our laurels thinking, oh dear, this is going to happen.
But what are we doing though?
Sorry?
But what are we doing?
Well, you're part of that, Councillor Kushner.
Well, but you're the cabinet, as
Yeah,
cabinet.
absolutely.
What are you doing?
So I was at a meeting with the other council leaders the other day on Zoom, and I raised that exact point and said, in the LCR, come on, we've got to join together. What are we doing together? I'm heavily involved in what's called the Living Income campaign at a national level. So I'm going to be speaking on that at the Fringe on the Labour Party conference online, which pulls together major national organisations that is pushing for tackling in-work poverty. Because at the moment, what the government keeps saying is, to get out of poverty, you just need to get a job. Well, I'm sorry, that's a lie. Because you can get out of poverty by having a decent job with decent terms and conditions, which goes straight back to Marmot. So yes, the LGA plus, and what's happening is we are part of the core cities and we're part of the LGA. At one point, we were actually being told we needed to pull away from the LGA, and I was one of the few that stood up and said, we do not pull away from the LGA with our allowances or whatever we pay into them. We have to stick with them. And not only is it political for Labour, but it's also cross-party. I mean, Andrew's, and we got connections there. This is where local government, because local government has been seen as so crucial and effective on the ground in the pandemic. We now have a chance, but we've got to be heard. So it's clever campaigning. We've got to do clever campaigning, and we will do all we can together. I will do all I can. I've got national connections I will use. Everybody, I mean, Nick's got national connections with the co-op. You've got that. We've all got the national connections. We pull them together and we push, but it's got to be coordinated. And the problem for Liverpool has always been that people have waited for us to kick off. Well, I'm sorry, guys, that is not the way it's done. It has to be done together, and there has to be responsibility. I was one of the people that asked the previous mayor back in, before he was mayor in 11, to have a fair, I can't remember quite what we called it. We had a fair funding package or something, and we gathered together people from Newcastle, from Birmingham, from Sheffield, and we had them here. So there's lots to be done, and there's no way I'm going to sit back and go and cry, oh, I'm so sorry, we've got to do all of these cuts, without having an almighty push. But we've got to do it cleverly. One of the things I did was I got an article in the FT. Who reads the FT? Not the usual suspects. We did a whole thing back on universal credit, because that was set up so that we could say exactly that point about in-work poverty. It wasn't the usual suspects.
Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to clarify my earlier point wasn't that I don't think it is the Deputy Mayor's responsibility to do this solely. I think what I was asking for is councillors across this chamber, regardless of political affiliation, we all want a better deal for Liverpool. No one wants to implement cuts. And I also think we need to work in partnership with our MPs. Obviously, they have the ear of the various people who are making these decisions and making us enforce the cuts. So I think we do need to be more strategic about this. We need a coordinated campaign. And obviously, maybe this isn't the meeting to do it in, but I think we need to have a better approach going forward, because it's getting very them and us, and I actually think it's us and them in London. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you're right. I think what I was saying is that they're existing. That it's not that there are existing structures, partnerships that that are taking proposals forward, or that we use to take them forward. The Northwest Councils Forum that meets regularly around education and social care, for example, will produce and provide that information, and it's just another voice adding pressure. The same around adult social care. And it's activating and making sure that we're involved in those conversations. The core city is obviously another one in taking it forward. It's not just saying that that Liverpool's got to kick off and others might or may not follow. It's using, though, it's the national pressure which has the impact on government, and these are cross-party. A lot of these organisations. Councillor Byrne.
Yeah, just a quick point, Chair. I think Liverpool does have to kick off, Jane. I'm not saying with the historical connotations, but we have to be extremely angry about what we're facing now and what we're potentially going to face if these cuts are implemented. And I think we've got to lead the LGA, because at times the LGA have been far too complicit in going along with what's actually happening. And now we've reached a point, potentially, of there's nothing left to cut now. You know, you've had 10 years of it. And I know the last mayor was talking about saying, well, he actually put on record that no more cuts. So how we determine that moving forward over the next 9 months is going to be extremely interesting. But when we say kick off, we have got to be absolutely angry about what's happening, and collectively with the LGA and every other person that's connected to this campaign. I think Barry's right. We owe it to our communities to be angry about what they're asking us to do.
Chair, what I'm not saying, don't mishear me and misquote me here. I'm not saying we won't kick off. What I'm saying is, in the past, other councils have waited for Liverpool to be the voice. And we were trying to say to them, alongside us being the voice, you have to take responsibility here. It's not all down to us. And now I think they're finally waking up. And that isn't just Labour councillors, that's councils across the country. Yes, of course. I mean, I'm absolutely furious, to be perfectly honest with you. And people know that, and I say it regularly. So there's no way I'm not kicking off. But what we've got to do is kick off in a really smart way that actually gets listened to. So getting a story on the front page of the FT is smart. Getting it into another newspaper that is the usual suspects will only read is not. Having a coordinated campaign, like you said, with the LGA, with the core cities, doing it through the select committees that you've got in government is smart. Having a coordinated campaign that is a campaign that says our voices are going to be heard. And we are already part of that, but we will be part of that as well. And I remember, Councillor Kushner, when I was probably the third year in, when I was Cabinet Member for Education and Children's Services, Ofsted came down and they brought some government people with them. And I said, you better go back and say to government that this is going to unravel very, very quickly. And this was on a Ofsted visit about adoption or something. And I said, you're cutting us so far back in councils that this will unravel. And when it does, it's going to reap a whirlwind. And they looked like, what do you mean? So I laid it out for them. But it's got to be coordinated. That's what I'm saying. And we are going to be part of that. And we'll keep going. And Liverpool is Liverpool. You know, Liverpool doesn't keep quiet, but we've got to be smart about it.
Okay, thank you. No one's blaming you for being in this situation. We've all had to face this situation. We're not. We've always had to face this situation for the last 11 years, and we know what the motivation of the Tory government is, and particularly in relation to this city. So I think it's, it's just getting a sense of that there are things that we're doing specifically that will apply pressure in particular ways using the avenues that are available to us. Yeah, but specific in terms of what they are. Yeah, but anyway, thank you for that. If there are no more questions on the budget at the moment, it will be something we'll be returning to, as I'm sure the capital board as well, because interestingly, the 13 million that we borrowed in addition for the roads. What return that's given us been interesting one. How that's been managed, another one question, but that's a question for another select committee. But these things have gone through when there's absolutely no money for housing at the moment. So I think those things are noticeable, and I think those things will return to. And I think we'll have. I think we'd like to put something on the agenda for the next meeting about capital investment, the capital board, and how that's operating. But if I move on to the revenue monitor, if I aim to finish at 15:15, sorry, we started a little bit late. Started at 15:15, finish at 7:15. No.
Everything's in the report. We're reporting £9.4 million overspend at this stage. We've got pandemic costs that are in there still, but the underlying issue from a financial point of view that we need to deal with is looked after children. That's what's causing the overspend in the main once you get beyond the pandemic costs.
Okay. Any questions, Paul?
Just on the looked after children issue, it's a national, but not unique. This has been a national pressure. Although noting at paragraph 4.5, you say that even with the extra 15 million that was put in, we're still looking at overspending. We're overshooting that by almost another 15 million. Is that reflective of what's happening nationally, or are we outliers on that? And more importantly, is there anything which is on the horizon as a measure that we can be confident will reduce that pressure and bring it down to zero at the end of the year? Yep.
We can get you the comparators around the core cities, because I wouldn't like to quote anything, because it's always a complex landscape, isn't it? So we can get that through to you. Is there anything on the horizon? We've got the demand management strategy that children's services are implementing at the moment, that they have been implementing for a couple of years, that's been trying to address the demand there. We were on a stable footing and a downward trajectory on looked after children, and then the pandemic hit. And I think, like most councils, we saw an increase in looked after children at various points during that pandemic. That demand management strategy is still being actively pursued. There are some elements of it where we know we have avoided children who were on the edge of care coming into care. So it has been having a positive impact. But we now just need to get the courts back up and running so that we can get adoption orders and placement orders through the courts.
There's an article, there's an investigation in The Guardian nationally that we're quoted into. I think our referrals went up by... So I think that the increasing demand for children's care and the cost that is, particularly of children's homes, that's requiring, could be supported through investment in developing children's homes, which I know we've something we've been trying. And I was pushing when I was the cabinet member, but it's something that. But this comes back to what capital is available and how we use it and what. So that it returns to some of the questions to that. Councillor Corbett.
When I was doing the Education Children's Services brief a few years ago now, so I stopped May 15, I think, from memory. The looked after children number is about 850, and they're now 1,500 and whatever, rising. So coming up to almost double. I think there could be, talking about a pushback on government, I think I've raised this with Mel in my cabinet member briefing already, but I think where there's external where the context is that the courts, for example, because of the pandemic, haven't been able to function like they did do previously, and therefore that's causing us problems in terms of getting children out of being looked after. I think we ought to say to the government, we need this money, please. This is outside of our control. You're in charge of courts, etc. This is how much it's costing us, and start putting together that evidence that pushes back. And even if they don't give it to us, we've got it there to show that we have tried to say, excuse me, this is outside of our control. If you can't do something about it, then you need to give us the money to be able to pay for it internally, because we can't do this at the moment unless you put the money right up.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on the revenue monitor? Okay, thanks, Mel and Jane. Can we move on to the work programme review? So obviously, it's still open for suggestions from the committee. I haven't had many. So can you please submit them, and if you copy Mike in if there's any suggestions. At the next meeting, I was going to suggest that we look at the capital board priorities, investment, and also maybe something around business rates, understanding of business rates and what the impact of that might have. So for the further suggestions for the next committee and subsequent ones, please send them through. Councillor Crone.
It's not a suggestion, but I was just going to ask, you've got the kind of terms of reference in this agenda for the Investor Save subcommittee. Have you got the members for that? Have people been given an opportunity to?
No, I mean, we have got a couple of people who've expressed an interest in that. I've got Councillor Harvey, Councillor Connor.
I'd like to express an interest in that as well.
Okay, fine. Okay, we'll come back to that in the next item. But just please send some suggestions forward, but I'll send ideas for the next meeting and then a couple of ones going forward, but so that Mike can start programming. So in terms of picking up that point, then for the appointment of scrutiny panel, so there's the terms of reference for the scrutiny panel. Is that for the Investor Save and Investor to Earn? Is that accepted by the committee as a way forward? And then we're doing it jointly with the neighbourhoods. I can't remember the name of that select committee. It's but
my Hetty Wood, isn't it? Regeneration. Also, I think you might need, sorry, Chair, the Chair of Audit as well on the panel, which was mentioned to Sue.
Okay. Yeah. We'll open up to that as well. So we've got got a couple of members from the whatever the neighbourhoods committee is called now, and so we've got 3 from our committee, and then I'll approach someone from audit and governance, and then we can set up some meetings and start to do some work on that.
Could I just ask as well that you're really tight on the terms of reference and tight on giving officers enough time to prepare for stuff, because we are still thin on the ground, so that everybody's really clear what they're being asked to do.
Yeah. Okay. Then I think the next item is the scheme of delegation. So there are some reports that are on page 78 of your committee papers. Are there any questions or issues that anybody wants to raise with any of these? Just give you just a minute, just have a look at them quickly. Of course, you've all read them before.
I want to know what the Apple contract is, because I have read them, and I'm thinking, will it help me get my iPhone restarted again? But more importantly, actually, we're not an Apple. So we use Windows, don't we, and all of our internal stuff. And there was another one I'd highlighted, which was the CCG lease at page. This will teach you for just now, wouldn't it? Page 78. Am I right in assuming, therefore, that the CCG or some of the CCG staff are moving into Cunard? Presumably they've already done so. Presumably that's with the consent of the ICS. Or we've not asked them to be. Okay. And is the intention to keep them co-located with us for purposes of close working together? Well, that's to be very welcome. Well done. Well done.
Sure, we can maximise when they come in. We'll be all over them like a rash. Yeah. So this is about actually moving into the building in Cunard. So when they're there, obviously that is great because they're in the same building. I'm sure we'll know the code on the door.
The only thing I would say is there's no amounts on any of these. Is there a reason for that?
Because what you get copied into the summary is about the recommendations. So And the
There's financial
recommendations
figures
that we got announced.
linked to them. Should we
I
not
think
see
we
them
did
as well?
agree last time we would put financial amounts on, Chair. I think we did agree last time we'd put financial amounts on, Chair. So that's my oversight. Apologies.
Yeah,
Okay.
we did. And in fact, I made a big push for it in regen as well. So it's only where it's can't see that it would be.
Okay.
Just to say, Chair, all the delegated authority reports, as they're now called, get published. So the full document, unless it's partially exempt, gets published as well. So that detail's on the internet.
Okay, but I think if there's finances associated with it, should be in there as well. Okay, so are we accepting the?
I mean, I'm just thinking. I know this is a bit more work, but there could be an easy, because sometimes it's not easy to find things on the net, on the council net. So there could just be a clear link, Chris, to say if you're looking for that, here's the link to those reports. It's a.
Yeah, what you said, a background link in the documents, yeah, the lists.
Okay, so are we accepting the Councillor Maker?
Thanks, Chair. Just on that point with the Apple development, just be interesting perhaps to get a report at some point, maybe put it in the work programme on those digital ambitions so we can actually scrutinise those properly and have some input.
Yeah, no problem. We do have a published digital strategy, so we can bring that here if you want, with an update on where we are against that strategy. Yep.
If you want that to be in the work programme, just send an email over. If you can copy Mike in as well, please. Okay, and I think that concludes our meeting for today. Sorry we've overrun a little bit, but thank you for your patience and your answer all the questions. You've answered all the questions that have been asked, and we'll pick up on the residual information that we need to provide before the next meeting. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening.